But I think what's really, really great about this so far is that just seeing how many of you I have seen in some spaces, or some of you haven't met, but I think I've heard of you because I don't think the admin community is as big as we think it is sometimes as well. So I'm really, really excited to, yeah, get to know you folks as well. Let me just play around with my settings so that I can see everyone. Um, I do just have one request from everyone because I think I'm already seeing that you folks have been super active in our community and are also like experts around community outreach and strategy as well. And I'd love if you can contribute to the presentation and share with me and with each other some of your like the lessons that you've learned, things that you find are working, what isn't working as well. And because while I've been doing this for a few years, you folks have like such a wealth of knowledge and information, and I want to be able to make sure that all of us can learn together as well. I think I'm just going to get started here. Sorry, I'm just playing around with my Zoom a little bit so I can see enough of you and see my screen at the same time. Okay, can you folks see my screen?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. So I'm Yasmin Rajabi, and just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I've been doing community organizing for around 12 years now, which makes me feel so old, but I'm not, I swear. I just started doing this work with young women and girls and developing after school programming. I've been doing community organizing in different capacities for the past decade now, from helping mobilize around food insecurity in Scarborough and the founding of Food Center to helping try to improve transit in Scarborough as well. And particularly like the 198 and like making it easier for folks to be connected across the city as well. And right now in my day job, I think like Yasna mentioned, I usually work with cities on how they can use data and technology. And it's something that like I keep in mind around community outreach, and I try to make sure that's still a very central tenet of the work I'm doing with cities as well. While these cities are thinking about like how they use data and technology, it's also really important that the work that we do is centered in the needs of community members. And that means that we need to reach out to those members as well and get their feedback so that our programs and our services are not only for those people, but they're also designed by those people as well. And I think that's like a central tenet of community organizing. And I hope that I can share some of that with you throughout the presentation as well. So yeah, like I said, I'm here to help you build your knowledge on how to reach out to community members. And I wanted to ask you before we get started, if you could just introduce yourself and then tell me if there's one thing that you're hoping to get out of today's session. If that's all right, I think I'm just gonna pick on someone to go first because there aren't too many of us. Oh, I don't know if I can see anyone's names though. Samira, do you mind going first just because I I know you.
No problem. I was like, she's gonna pick me, isn't she? My name is Samira. I think one thing I just wanted to learn was it comes from the title best practices, and just really how to reach out to folks and do a good job myself, but also pass on that knowledge to other people so that it's like tangible, not only for me to be learning something new, but passing it on to somebody else and for them to easily apply it as well.
Oh, I love the way that you're thinking about this. Awesome. Just because I'm having a hard time seeing your names, Samira, do you mind just passing it on to someone else?
Yes. Oh yeah, sorry, I thought you meant me. Yeah.
We can do popcorn style, that works. Yeah. I'll pass it on because the next person underneath me is Hamara, so you can go.
Hi, Yasmin. Sorry, did you want the introduction as well?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So my name is Hamara. I'm actually calling from Calgary, Alberta. Sorry, I'm a pharmacist and I work with children in cancer, and I've had a lot of creative projects that I want to work on, and now I'm realizing how creative projects can also become community projects, and it can also benefit Afghan people across Canada. And I feel like I've been waiting to meet people like you guys for so long, and like 2021 has been the year where I've met the coolest Afghans ever. So I'm really excited to be here. I have a lot of experience when it comes to like student governance and like pharmacy, like provincial advocacy, but I don't know how to operate in the Afghan diaspora world. Like I don't really know where everyone is. I don't know like where we are even just in terms of like if we've newly landed here or if we've been here for a long time. And so how do we build that sort of community, and how do we access the right people, the people that want to be involved and the people that want to be engaged and the people that have these creative ideas in a way that is the most inclusive.
Mhm. Taking note of that. And I'm really, really excited to have you here. And I think also getting to know you folks as well, like I did for me, was like such a formative moment from my journey and getting involved in the Afghan community. I remember the first conference a few years ago now. And that's where I feel like I've made a lot of those connections in the community as well. So I'm very grateful for this space that you folks have created. And taking note of what you said about how to do that outreach within the Afghan community and making sure that it's inclusive as well.
I can pass on to Farah.
Hey guys, my name is Farah. I'm calling from Barrie, Ontario. Basically, I help with the project called the School Bag Project, and we basically help new Afghans who come here and kind of go into the school, the Canadian school system, with giving them bags and like essentials that are needed to succeed in school. And basically, what I'd like to learn from this presentation is how to be able to reach the people who most need those bags. And just be able to help them, because we do have websites and Instagram and stuff, but I feel like we still don't reach out. Like we still have a lot of bags left at the end of the day, and we really want to be able to get those out to the people that need them. And I know with the influx of Afghans that are coming in right now, that's gonna help. But yeah, I would like to learn more about how to get out there.
And nice to meet you. I think I've heard of your project actually through like a coworker of mine, Darren. He was like, oh, I think there's this project that you might be really interested in. So what a small world.
Yeah, very small. Very nice to meet you.
Likewise. Ghazal, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Yasmin. It's good to see you. I think I know you through UTSC. If you remember me, but it's really good to see you here again. So my name is Hazel, and I'm thinking of working on like a creative approach towards my project in terms of involving the Afghan community and diaspora, and kind of sharing their experiences about back home and how they feel about it. And I think what I want to get out of this presentation the most is like Humaira John said, not only just finding the right people, but also engaging them in a way where they would want to participate in the project. So not only just reaching out and making people aware of what's going on and the project that's happening, but also kind of approaching it in a way where they would want to be interested in participating. So maybe different ways to make it as appealing as possible for people to actually join and participate in the activities.
Okay, perfect. Got that. Thank you. And of course, I remember you. When I saw you, I was really excited to have a chance to connect with you again.
Oh, and I guess I can pass it on to Lena. I think she hasn't gone.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. My name is Lena. I'm from Toronto. What I'm hoping to get out of today's workshop, like Farah John mentioned, I want to be able to reach out to like newcomer Afghans, and because most of like advertising and like all of that is like through social media, and sometimes they're not on there. And so being able to reach out to them and ensure that they're being included is really important. So that's what I hope to get out of today's workshop. And I'll pass it to Marwa.
Hi, my name is Marwa. I'm the founder of the Afghan Youth Book Club, and I'm also the social media director at ACII as well. And what I'm looking to get out of this workshop is, like, I've heard a lot about how it's important to reach out to other organizations and stuff, but I'm wondering, like, what's the most effective or efficient way to do that? Because you can't just like reach out to anyone all the time. Like, you have to have kind of like a plan or something, but I've also heard some other people say that you just have to like reach out and it kind of like naturally works out. So I'm just wondering how that works.
Probably a little bit of both, but happy to touch on that. Cool.
And pass it on. I don't know if anyone else, is there anyone else left? Did anyone not speak?
I think there's one person. Sorry, I think you have a photo. I don't think you spoke
Has
yet. I just
Lena
can't see your
spoken?
schemes.
Lena.
Is it Marcel Tahiti?
Yeah, I think
I've
so.
spoken, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Sorry.
Marcel has messaged.
Oh, nice. Okay, let me read your message. Okay, amazing. Okay. Awesome. So you work with children, which is I love children, so I'm really excited about that as well. And I thank you for sharing. And I'll try to monitor the chat as well so I can keep informed. But if there's anything that I miss, yes, now please just like let me know and I'll make sure to touch on it as well.
absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for sharing a little bit about yourselves and what you're here for. I'm going to get this started. Sorry, bear with me as I'm trying to figure out some of the tech stuff. Okay. Before we kind of get going, I wanted to just touch on like the framework I use around developing and designing programs. It's something called design thinking, and it's borrowed from the innovation ecosystem, and it's a way of quickly understanding the needs of your communities and being able to test and experiment as well. And I find that it's helpful for smaller projects before you start scaling your programs as well. So just to give you a quick overview of it, it first involves like doing a bit of that empathy work and trying to understand who your users are. And that involves doing a little bit of research, speaking with them. There's a few different methods that you can do, and I can get into it as well. And then next up is bringing all of the research that you've learned, collected, all of the insights from speaking with people, and trying to create that problem statement and define what is actually the issue. And once you've done that, you start brainstorming and ideating around what are some potential solutions, and go big, go small, do everything. That's the point of brainstorming, just to kind of throw everything at the wall. And what's really good as well is that you can start prototyping and experimenting and using small ways of testing if your programs or services are working. For example, I think I'm trying to remember if it was you, Farah, or if it was you, Lena, who mentioned about backpacks, right? There's different ways that, sorry, who is that?
Sorry, I cut you off. That was me.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Farah. And so there's different ways of like experimenting. Maybe you're dropping it off at different locations or using different partnerships. And it doesn't mean you have to do like a big commitment towards one approach. And it's about seeing like what works and what doesn't. So you can get feedback. That's what the test portion is, whether that's from the users or just from the data that you have. And you can use that to be able to roll out like a full scale project. And I recommend just taking that approach because it's like low stakes way of testing out. And what I find is that we always will mess up and make mistakes. And that's a part of like living your life and being human. And but when it comes to the work that we do, it's good to be able to do a bit of that preparation as well ahead of time so that you can embed it in your learnings and make sure that you're constantly improving as well. And this cycle is continuous. As you can kind of see, the implement feeds right back into the empathy portion. So once you've actually tested out your program, you have a better idea of what the needs of your users or your audience are as well. So it never stops. It's always going on. So before we kind of get going, I know a few of you have shared already, but I'm curious about who you're hoping to impact through your projects. So Farajan, you mentioned children or folks who need backpacks. And I know that you have a few other projects as well on this team. So I'm excited to hear what is your core target audience. Like I know it's generally like Afghan people, Afghan youth, but sometimes there's a bit more of a specific segments as well. Feel free to jump in. Otherwise, I will ask.
I can try. So I actually, in terms of trying to define our target audience, I was really trying to think about, okay, I just want to help everyone, but I guess the more focused I can be, the better. I can sort of give you clusters and it'll overlap from these keywords, but like Hazara, individuals, creatives, professionals that are in Canada. So I'll limit it to Canada geographically. So that means that we're in the diaspora. Creatives, professionals, hobbyists, and the goal is to sort of redefine and to reconnect people. And so in addition to that audience, it's also the generation that comes before them, to whatever extent they're wanting to be involved, to sort of redefine that visual element of our cultural identity.
And you've done such a good job of being able to like articulate that and identify like the specific segment. And why I ask this question is because oftentimes when you try to serve everyone, you serve no one in particular. So I think to be able to reach the impact that you want to, particularly with like a micro grant or like a smaller project, that you need to be really specific on who you want to target as well. So just to kind of get into it. It's once you have your core target audience, it's important to start asking questions and doing a bit of like a needs assessment. That's what they call it in like the nonprofit world. And it's essentially trying to understand who your community is, what some of their challenges are, and what some of their strengths are as well. So I've just put in a couple of sample questions here for you that you can use, and I'm happy to share the slides afterwards as well if you want to reference it. But it's essentially like it's for you to be able to tailor your program or service to particular people, you need to know what they're interested in, where they are, what is their everyday lives like as well. And oftentimes like needs assessments tend to be very critical and look at what's missing and what are some of the challenges, which is of course like important because we're trying to serve people. We're here because there is some unmet need. But I think it's also important to highlight the strengths that our communities have and the resources that are also available to them as well. And we use those resources and strengths as input into being into our work as well, so that we can leverage it for our programs. So an example could be if our community that you're hoping to reach out is, what I found at least with the Afghan community is that over the past few years, a lot of youth organizations have popped up, a lot of young people who are very politically active and want to give back to their community. And that's such a big strength to have. As a community, that means there are champions within our community who are willing to do the work. So when we're thinking about running a program, we can say, oh, I can call that person, they can help me out, or I can tap into this network as well. It's important to keep that in mind. And as you have a better idea of who you're trying to reach and what some of the issues that they're grappling with and some of the resources that they have, you'll start to come up with defining your problem. So essentially, articulating what is it exactly that you want to address. And I think a lot of you folks are already at this stage, which is good. And what I think also is really important in community outreach is being able to craft your message in a way that resonates with the audience. For me, sometimes I run into tangents and I'm just like talking again and again, and I'm like, oh, people hate this. Like, this is not working out at all. Like, especially when the attention spans are short. And it's, to be honest, I think at this point, a lot of our attention spans are short. There's a lot of things going on in the world. It's hard to be fully alert all the time. So it's really, really important to kind of keep a few principles in mind as we're making those messages, about it being concise and really, really short and to the point, making sure that it's clear and easy to understand, especially since I know a lot of you folks are reaching out to folks who are newly immigrated or are younger or youth. It's important that we use language that resonates with them, that makes sense to them, because if it's confusing, then they're not even looking at your message because they don't understand what it is. And then I would also say that it's just simple as well. So oftentimes this little formula gets the core of it, of around like, what is your problem? What problem are you trying to address? What is your solution and how you're thinking of addressing it? And then what is something that the audience can do? I think just having the first two is nice. And I think a lot of people are like, okay, that's cool. But once you start involving the audience and saying, hey, there's ways that you can actually make a difference or make a change. And maybe that's just by attending the event and building their own capacity or learning more information themselves. It's a way of getting them involved and feeling like they're working towards something and solving a problem as well. Because like I said at the very beginning, it's not about providing things to people, it's about building and working together so that we can all meet the needs of our community as well. So I think you folks have done this. Like, this is a bit of a template that you can use for crafting your message. But I think from hearing you folks speak about your projects, I think you are all very articulate and have a good understanding of what your project is, the vision for what it is, what you're offering, what makes it unique as well. So I'm not going to spend too much time here because I want to hear you folks speak a little bit more as well. Oh, your cat is so cute. Absolutely adorable. See, this thing about having short attention spans. So something else, once you are having a better understanding of who your users are, it's also really important to start doing some stakeholder mapping, and there's different ways that you can do it. I've tried to share a way that's really simple and easy, just because I think, especially for you folks, I think this is something that you all are doing as a grassroots project and is off the side of your desk, and it's like after work hours or after school. So I want to make sure that this is something that's also approachable for everyone. So stakeholder mapping is when you take a look at all the people that are related to your project or impacted by your project and trying to understand how they feed into your project, how they impact it, and what are the best ways that you can also engage them for different outcomes. So the first group is usually, these are the users and the beneficiaries of your program. So this is, if you're running an after school program, those are the kids that are attending your after school program. And so these are the people that you really, really want to make sure are hearing your message, are involved, and this is your primary audience for your community outreach as well. And then the second one are influencers. So these are people who are in some way involved or have influence over the people that you want to directly reach out. So in the case of the after school program, that's, for example, is a teacher at the school. Because they deal with the students on a regular basis and can maybe help you out. Or maybe it's their parents as well. So these are people who have direct influence in some sort of way, and it's important to keep them informed in the loop and sometimes have them actively a part of the work as well and shaping it. And then finally are decision makers. So these are people who have the ability to either make your program super successful or to completely cut it off. And oftentimes when we think about decision makers, we think about the policy makers. So these are people in government who can create those systems change that we talk about, or they can be funders, people who fund your projects, or people that just in different capacities. They don't have to always have a lot of power. Power can look very different, but without their influence or without their buy-in, your program isn't possible. And sometimes there is that overlap between decision makers and users as well, depending on what your project is. And while it's really important to keep all of these people informed, you can do it on different capacities. Like, not influencers don't have to know every single thing you do, or even your users don't have to know about every single thing you do either. But what is really, really important is that you also make sure that these groups of people are also part of the program design and part of your team, essentially. Because I think it's when you have the decision makers at the table, I found, at least with me, you get a lot more buy-in from them. They feel like, oh, I actually had an influence on this. This is my program. Or they feel those feelings of attachment to it. So if you're, for example, trying to get funding, it's a little easier because they've seen the process, they've seen how you work. Or for example, like influencers. So if you bring in a teacher, they have an understanding of how an after school program is run, and you can kind of rely on their expertise or share about different strategies that you think may be effective with the people you're trying to reach out to. And because they have influence over those users, they know what works and what doesn't work, and can oftentimes relay your message as well. And then lastly, I think it's really important to keep in mind, like, the people that we actually are trying to serve. They're really, really knowledgeable. Ideally, those users are represented within your team as well. And sometimes that could be yourself. Like, I was running programs for young women and girls to get them civically engaged. So I was the direct user of my program. So I had a good understanding of, like, oh, this is what works. This is what I need. But it's important to also get perspectives outside of yourself as well. And I know that's going to be a little harder sometimes than other scenarios, just because depending on the nature of your program. For example, if you're working with newcomers, it might be hard to get them super engaged. I think if you are trying to make your program a little bit more accessible, you provide incentives, honorariums, so that you understand. Like, I haven't been a newcomer in like a very long time. A very long time. So it just, the changes in the legislative environment, the day-to-day, the services that are provided, it looks so different now than it did like 17 years ago when I first came. Thank you, Halida and Yasna. Yeah, and there's different ways of getting them involved, whether that's like a steering committee or an advisory committee. And the way that I know IED has one as well, like I think it's really helpful. You get a broader like a coalition essentially around your project. Sometimes they're not super involved in the day-to-day, but they can provide you advice as well, and help roll out some of your work as well. Don't know if there's any questions here or comments or ways that people have done some of the stakeholder mapping themselves.
Yeah, does anyone want to share about anything that Yazmin touched on, or maybe in a little bit?
Yeah, and no pressure. There's a lot of opportunities to still contribute. And I just want to make sure that I keep time, because I know we end at 3:45.
Yes, no worries at all.
And some of those some of those stakeholders I mentioned are going to be less so people, and are going to be organizations instead. And something that I keep in mind, and I think about all the time actually, is like in the nonprofit world, it's really, really common to find organizations that crop up, serve the needs of communities, and then kind of die out a little bit, because the nonprofit world isn't oftentimes well funded, isn't well resourced, and the capacity is low as well. And it's really disheartening to see that all this work that people have put in has kind of just stopped there. And what I want to encourage people to do is to continue to build on the work that people before us have done. So it's oftentimes that means like doing a little bit of research into like, or asking around, I guess in this case, maybe a little easier than trying to Google it. Is saying like, if I'm running an after school program, who else was running an after school program in the past? Like, what did they do? How did they learn? And maybe they did this 10 years ago and the program shut down because the people had to move on and do other things with their career. But I'm sure that they had learned a lot of things in that time as well that are still relevant to us as well. And something else to keep in mind as well is that we're not in this alone. We are all here. And I think this, particularly because ID is creating the space to bring everyone who is running this program together, either like through different forums and conversations. I think we can lean on each other a lot. Like often, especially if we are trying to target the same users, we can ask each other for support and try to meet some of maybe the same users, but different needs. As well. And maybe it's outside of the ecosystem that IED has, but generally as well, like if you are running, for example, I'm going to use the after school program because I think it's just a very tangible, easy example. So if you're running an after school program, like a partnership that would be really good would be a school, and trying to reach out to schools or local guidance counselors and trying to see if they can help promote some of your work and messaging as well. And this is for a couple of reasons. And the first one is because, especially as a new organization, like, well, some of you are very active within the community and like people have a lot of trust in you. Some of us are less familiar or are less familiar with the organization that you're running. And there isn't that much trust yet. And that's like a part of that continuous development of yourselves and the work that you're doing as well. So for someone to come out to an event and they don't know you, they don't know your organization, is a big ask. They're essentially like, it's a bit of a risk of whether it's going to be something they enjoy or not, something that fits within their values. So having an organization or a person that they trust that can endorse your work is so important. It acts as like this third party validation, essentially. Somebody else vouched for you, and I find it to be the most like effective outreach tool strategy. And this is just like even outside of like organizing, I think even in our own lives, like when we think about like the people that we're friends with, right? It's so much easier to make a connection with someone or want to make a connection with someone once you have someone else who has vouched for them as well. And this is the same concept for the organizations and the work that you folks are doing. Yeah, I agree, Alina. It is really, really hard to build that trust for a startup. And oftentimes that means like putting in the work and showing up as often as possible and being consistent as well. And trust is one of those things that is really delicate. It only usually takes one thing to break trust, but it takes forever to build as well. So I can go through some of those strategies as well. But before we kind of get into it, I wanted to ask you, since I'm actually familiar with a ton of you here, like I know you folks have run community programs or have done programming within universities or schools that you've been as well and have had to do this outreach. I'm curious about what kind of outreach strategies you're familiar with and have used or maybe heard of, and like what your experiences with them have been.
Well, I can go. So for our project, we at the beginning, a lot of us who are in the project are not very active in the Afghan community. So it's really hard to reach out to Afghan children and Afghan youth to give these bags out. So we did go to schools and different schools and like through some like social programs to ask them to promote us to these immigrants that were coming in. But then we thought that it would be great if we could reach out to big Afghan pages on social media and ask them to kind of promote our project because they do have that Afghan following and they've been active in the community for a while to kind of get us that audience, and then they can refer us to whoever's needing that bag.
That's a really good strategy, Farah. How did you find it? Was it something that you thought was effective?
Yeah, 100%. It was hard to, because I guess they're also busy doing their own projects and promoting like events at the same time. So it was hard to kind of get them to cooperate, but some of them were kind enough to do so. And we did get some people out of those. We got some very good responses and we were able to help some people. So that was great.
Yeah, and I find in community outreach and organizing, it's always like about who you know and like how like you can connect with the broader ecosystem and network as well.
Yeah.
Are there is there anyone else that wants to share some of the strategies they've taken? And it doesn't have to be in the context of like the Afghan community either. It can be any other work you've done.
I can share if that's okay. So one strategy that I found the most effective to getting people to come out to events is to reach out to them personally from your own accounts and not from the organization's account, because I find like even though you're trying to promote it on your, like, let's say you're posting on Instagram or tweeting it, people will most likely they're not paying attention to everything that they're seeing. So if you kind of, DM them with the details, you actually have more people showing up and like saying, oh, I can't make it, but then posting it on their stories to kind of show support in that way. So I feel like that personal touch kind of is helpful, but it is a bit more time consuming than other methods.
Yeah, I love sliding into people's DMs over programming. I'm like, hey, you look like someone that I think would be able to, who wants to attend or be able to attend. And the thing is, I find that people who like love and care for you or know you or trust you in some capacity want to help you. I think it's like not underestimating the power and the influence that we ourselves have as well. And I think that's just the power of like, even if they can't come, if they can't help out in some way, they want to be able to share and promote your work as well to their audience. So Mara, I saw that you had a comment here about you and another youth-led group joined forces for the book club, which is really neat. And again, like it's the power of like coming together and being able to pool our resources around this as well, instead of it being a bit more fragmented. And I think it's also like when you're doing community outreach, you get tapped into more of those networks. And by showing up, you become familiar with each other as well. And Marcel, you wrote a comment about, writing letters personally to businesses and school associations that can help promote or sponsor events. Yeah, I've definitely used this one. And I do think it's right with, especially with like more formal institutions, and like if it's less people, individual people, and more like organizations, institutions, like taking that very formal approach and writing a letter and like almost like pitching yourself in your organization tends to be helpful as well. I remember doing some of this work around trying to get like sponsorships particularly. So that's really neat. So
I just wanted to add one more thing that wasn't mentioned. It's a little bit more technical, but what I found really helpful was running Instagram ads as well, and like Facebook ads. So it's a little bit more in the like practical sense, but I found that like targeted ads, especially on social media, were extremely helpful to get people who wouldn't have found the page otherwise to get them involved. So that's also something to consider.
And they're collecting all this data on us anyway, so let's try to at least use it for something that is good for us in some way. So that's a really good point. And like, don't be afraid of like investing money into your outreach as well. Like I think people shy away from it because they're like, oh, like we want to have some hard costs, like I want to pay for food or I want to pay for a speaker. But if you don't invest in outreach, you're not going to have anyone to be able to provide those services or those programs for. And I find that ads tend to be, like buying advertisements is a really, really good bet. Like you said, like they've gotten really good at targeting and figuring out who you should reach out to. And especially since so many of us are now like in the digital space all the time, it's like a really good way of reaching out to people. Cool. Sorry, I just keep making my Zoom screen bigger so I can see everyone, but then it blocks my PowerPoint. So it takes me a few minutes to adjust. What I found with community outreach is that you can't expect people to look for you. You have to go find them. And oftentimes that means meeting them where they're at. And there's two different interpretations of that. It's like meeting them at the capacity they are, the knowledge they are of their understanding of the work they are. So that's not making things too complicated for people to understand, for example. And that ties back to like doing that needs assessment at the beginning to understand where your community is at, just in terms of their own knowledge or like some of the issues they're dealing with. And on the flip side, knowing as well, like quite physically, where are they? Are they at schools? Are they in masjids? Are they not going to any of those things? Like, how can we reach out to them? And I remember so many instances where I would just print out leaflets or flyers and I would literally just walk around and approach random people and be like, hey, my name is Yasmin, I'm doing this work. What are you doing here? And like, that's a part of like building that trust with people and trying to reach out to new people as well. Because again, I think in youth organizing and a lot of the community spaces, we run into the same people again and again and again. And while it's really cool that so many people are engaged, it also presents a bit of a challenge too. Like, are we over tapping the same people? Are the same people getting a disproportionate amount of programming in comparison to others who aren't aware and maybe aren't plugged into some of these communities as well? Because I think for a long time, I wasn't plugged into the Afghan community and I didn't know many of you. So I would have never known about this program if someone promoted it on Instagram, versus if I was just like walking around at like my after school program or at university or something and someone stopped me and talked to me about it, I would, it's another way of reaching people that you normally wouldn't. And it's a way of also just building that trust as well. Like people want to know who you are. And I think someone mentioned this earlier as well, like people don't necessarily trust an organization because that's hard to do, but people trust you, right? So it's important that you show up in places, that people recognize your face, that you do it. And the thing is, is that trust takes a long time to build. Like I said earlier, like you have to be consistent with it. And I remember one thing I did was, I remember when I was doing a program, we wanted to make sure that our community members trusted us, that they knew who we were. So our like team exec put together a list of like stakeholders that we had that we really wanted to get to. And we identified if they had events coming up, and we made sure that at least one person was going to each event. So it's a way of just taking something and distributing the workload among your whole team as well, but making sure that you show up. And word of mouth is like the most effective strategy. I think there's actually research that shows that people are more likely to do something if it's their mom, the sister, or the coworker, someone that they're close to and see on an everyday basis, kind of shares information or vouches for you. So I think what I try to do is I always try to like present challenges to people, and I say, hey, like, you've been like someone who's really loyal to our program. You've come every single week. Can you bring someone next time? And if they're coming to your event every single week, or if they know you or trust you, they're sold already on the idea. They know that this is something good, and they want to be able to share that with the people around them. And sometimes this happens really naturally. People like want to share it, but sometimes you have to make that ask, and don't be afraid to do it. And sometimes like you can provide incentives, like, oh, if you bring one other person, you'll get recognition in some way. Like they'll give you a certificate, or maybe you can write a blog post, or maybe I'll give you extra hours or something like that. And it helps. And I even do this at work, honestly, with the people I do. I'm like, oh, if you can get us new clients, like I'll give you extra funding for something. And like I said, getting to people in this space where we're like bombarded by messages all the time is really hard. Like maybe I'll see an ad and I'm like, oh, whatever, skip by on Instagram story, whatever, I've seen this already. But after maybe like the fourth time I see it, I'm like, oh, so many people are sharing. What is this about actually? Like, let me take a look at it. If this many people are sharing, it has to be something cool. So I think it just speaks to repetition is so important in outreach. Like you have to be sharing in as many channels as you can with as many people as you can as well. So don't feel like you're overdoing it sometimes. You're not. People won't read your first message, or won't look at the flyer the first time they see it or the event. And maybe after like the fifth time they'll do it. And I think I touched on like flyers, brochures, and leaflets. And of course, this looks really different right now, like in a COVID world. But even still, like a lot of people are still doing outreach. Like the election is coming up, the federal election, and like people are still dropping off flyers at doors. So don't feel like afraid to do that. I think it's the most effective way of doing it, and it's the most effective way of reaching to people than you normally wouldn't. And I think the hard part is like, where do you do that leaflet drop? Just because we don't always have a good sense of where we are in a geographic area. So maybe I know there's certain pockets of Toronto where there's a huge Afghan population, for example, in Thorncliffe. So maybe going through some of those apartment towers and just literally just dropping in leaflets of your programming, your events is important as well. And then like a door to door, again, that's a little hard because I don't know if people want to answer their doors these days. But social media is like the most obvious and the easiest, I think, sometimes to do. It takes the least amount of resources compared to like showing up everywhere. But I think someone else mentioned, maybe it was you, Farah, about tapping into existing channels in the community. Especially as a new organization, you're not going to have the biggest following. So maybe reach out to like community Facebook groups or Instagrams, or and ask them to share your events and promote it. And honestly, don't underestimate the power of WhatsApp. I find that a lot of our elders, a lot of our parents, ourselves are on WhatsApp. And I don't know about you, but I always get those like WhatsApp forward chains, and you're like, oh, I think this is misinformation, first of all, but let's flip it around and use it for good. And don't feel afraid to reach out to the elders in our community as well. Like even if you're trying to get young people to come to your events, they have parents, they have uncles and aunts that you can use to like share the programming around as well. And the last point was just asking partners and ambassadors to promote your projects as well. Like particularly people, like when you do in the Afghan community, it's not, like I said, it's not very big. So there's a couple of people, there's a few people there that we think has a lot of influence, has a far reach, is really tapped into the community. So just slide them DMs like, hey, can you help me promote this? And oftentimes those people are really willing to do it as well. And sometimes you'll have to do a little bit of research to see like who will speak to a certain demographic of community as well. I'm just gonna read the chat really quickly to see if I've missed anything. Yes, Markham and Eglinton is definitely a neighborhood that is really helpful. And that means like, I think a lot of you, like a few other spaces that we may wanna reach out to, or just like I don't wanna undersell the importance of literally just walking around neighborhoods and talking to people. And sometimes you may run into someone and they're not Afghan, but they have like an Afghan friend and they can hook you up. Like a communities, like particularly like I don't live in Scarborough now, but I'm from Scarborough. Like it's a very diverse community, and like people know each other, know where they're from, and like are happy to help out as well. So even if you're not always hitting the exact people you need to, you'll get there eventually. Before we move on, I'm wondering if anyone else wants to share like any other methods or something that maybe came to you as I was talking. Cool. If not, I think also there's barriers to engagement, which I think a few of you identified as something that you want to get out of today's session. I know you folks talked about the difficulty of reaching out to certain groups who aren't on social media, for example, newcomers, or who aren't already accessing, who aren't already in the networks that we have. Are there other barriers that you have kind of encountered or are already thinking as like something that might potentially pop up for your project? Yeah, COVID is definitely the biggest barrier, and it's difficult because I've been trying really hard not to like doom school and like see all these things about the fourth wave. I'm like, oh, can we go back to normal at some point? But it's probably going to be here for a little bit still, and we'll still have to live with it. And like a lot of those in-person outreach tactics I gave you aren't necessarily going to always work in the same way. Like, but I think there are ways of getting around it. Like even political canvassing, and I'm sorry, I'm referring to the federal election a lot because I think I've picked up a lot of like community organizing tactics from that space, and it's coming up as well. And like it's particularly in the COVID space, it's a good way to kind of see it. Like people are still canvassing, they're going door to door, they're talking to people, they're doing leaflet drops, like they're going to community events and speaking to people. I think while like COVID is restrictive, like I don't want us to get lost in trying to reach out to those people directly still. Oh yeah, that's true about like trying to reach out to some of our older generation and the difficulty of that as well. And sometimes maybe it's just going through our own families as well. Like I think for me, what I haven't done the best of is tapping into the own Afghan networks that my family has. And I think it's really important to do that because all the people I meet through like ID, through all the other people are super active, like engaged, university educated people. And that's not always the case through like my family friends or my own family members. So it's important to reach out to them and say, hey, like maybe they can share it with 2-3 people within their own networks as well. And like they could just forward the WhatsApp chain, honestly, as well.
I have a quick question, Yasmin. Sorry, just in terms of barriers as well, like even the current situation in Afghanistan, I feel like there's a lot of division, even just in terms of what do people think is the right thing to do right now? What do people think is the right message to share, and what platforms should be elevated, or which individuals need to be, you know, sort of out there so that their message can be heard, and how do we make sure that we're all heard? And I feel like there has, like, I mean, I have experienced some criticism just in terms of like I'm looking so far into the future, but what am I doing now? Like, what strategies do you have in terms of how we can communicate to that specific demographic? And they may be hurt, they may be triggered, there's a lot of trauma that a lot of people are working through, and that's being sort of re-triggered with everything that's going on. But have you come across this, and what have you found that's been successful?
That's a really good question. Are you referring to the Afghan diaspora or folks that are in Afghanistan right now?
I don't know if I'm specific to either group necessarily, but I feel like there's
the online community, which is a lot of the individuals are from the diaspora. But I don't know if I have a distinction.
That's a really good question. And I don't know if I have an answer for it, to be honest. I think it's something I think about, and I'm seeing online right now as well. So I totally relate to that. I think it's hard because especially what's going on, like yesterday, I just couldn't stop crying about everything going on. And I think it's like hard to not feel that way after everything, because like so many of us are connected to the people back home. That is like our watan, right? Like we love it. And I think it's just, and I think about this all the time with my mom, and my mom teaches me resiliency a lot. She is someone who's just gone through so many hard things in her life, and I think so many of our parents, so many of us as well have. And it's this thing of like, even if hardships are taking us down or making our lives difficult, we have to have hope. We have to look to the future. And if we don't plan for the future, if we don't have a vision for the future, like there's no way to get there, right? If it's always crisis response, we're not painting that future that we want to live in and we want to continue to be here to live for, as well. And I think there's also like a lot of duality in us as well. Like we can, like, I'm a big believer of like, we can have it all. Like it doesn't mean like, it's not like we can only have one thing. That's it. We can organize around like supporting peace in Afghanistan and supporting our community members and supporting our families at the same time as doing some of this programming as well. Like, yeah, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that as well. Like, I think that's a really, really good point that I know a community right now is grappling with. Okay, I think I saw a message about us needing to wrap up soon. Yasna, is that true?
Yeah, we are ready to wrap up. However, please feel free to take another 5 minutes if you'd like to wrap up. If anyone has any other comments, or I know we're having a great discussion right now, so feel free to continue.
Yeah, I'm gonna just try to speed through this really quickly.
Yeah.
And then because I want to make sure we get through this, because I know that you folks were interested in it, around like addressing barriers in our community. And like the first part around, one of the biggest parts is like, how do you even get people to come? And that is around like building that trust. And like I've already shared some of this, but working with people that are already trusted in the community, or organizations that are already trusted in the community. For example, like there's a lot of really large like settlement organizations, community organizations that work with newcomers, or social workers in the community that have like deep ties that we can kind of tap into. And I think it also means being reactive to what's happening in our community. And if they're like, for example, what's happening right now with Afghanistan, like posting about it and sharing your sadness is also really important to say that, hey, you're not in this alone. Like I'm also feeling this. And it's creating that space of saying that we are dealing with the same issues. And we are from the same community as well. And also if things happen, like it's not ignoring them. And I think in the context oftentimes in my work is around, I've done a lot of organizing around sexual violence prevention and response. And oftentimes that tends to be an issue in a lot of different communities. And we always brush it aside. Or if like an instance of like discrimination happens, we're like, oh, well, let's not talk about this. But not talking about it creates that space where people don't feel safe and they don't feel like they can trust you, and they don't want to come to your events then. So I think it's making sure that we're responding to the needs of our communities, that we are reactive, that if something happens, we believe in ourselves and we trust ourselves to be able to respond to it as well. And that doesn't mean always like having the right answers. It's having enough trust in yourself to feel vulnerable to say that I don't, but how can we do this together? Again, time and consistency, and I've touched on this a lot. And the other one is like, people don't know about your project. That tends to be a really big barrier because they can't engage. So I think just a quick summary of what I said was, make sure you have a clear, concise, and consistent message that you should be able to articulate your impact and what you want to do in 1 to 2 sentences. If you do anything beyond 1 to 2 sentences, I think you need to simplify it a little bit more so that this can reach out to everyone in our community. Again, making sure that we're doing a lot of repetition. We're using multiple outreach channels. It's not just social media, like I think one of you said, and I agree with you. We're trying to use as many channels as we can, and making sure that we're also tailoring our message to our audience. If you're working with young people or like children, you need to make sure that the language resonates with them. So that means also like testing it out. If you have a sibling that's younger, or a cousin or a nephew, say like, hey, like this is, what do you think about me providing you a backpack? Or what do you think about this? Like, and see what works, and like do a bit of like A/B testing. And see, those are like the assets we have and the strengths that we have in our community, like having people that represent those groups or can help us out as well. And I think another big one is also like providing incentives for people to join your program, to be a part of it, to volunteer. Like, I think we think sometimes it's like, oh, it's so clear. Like, of course, you're gonna get some skills. You're gonna get a free backpack. You're gonna get this. But it's not always that simple. Like, I think what I try to do, at least with my events, is like, or some of the work that I've done is literally write a bullet point that says, by attending, you will, and then get like a free thing, or like have more knowledge on this, and like making it super duper clear, because sometimes in our head we make assumptions that things are easier to understand than what they are as well. And financial incentives are also really important. Like, I remember I attended a Dukhbazi workshop, and I think that was funded by IED, and they like provided us like a gift card to go get more materials afterwards, and that was a really nice touch. And I think it's also like an incentive for people. I think it was the like the sewing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. And it's, yeah, just giving people honorariums, even like having people come to your program, particularly folks that are like new to this country or low income, like them being there means that they're not making money, right? And we want to be able to access those people. We want them to be able to benefit from the program. And maybe that means like giving them $20 for coming to your event. And sometimes maybe that's like a Visa gift card so that they can actually like spend it on groceries or whatever they need as well. And don't feel afraid to spend money on the people that are going to be there. It doesn't have to always be like experts or professionals or things like that. Like having people receive money and putting money in the pockets of our community is also really, really important. And then another one was around recognition, like giving them volunteer hours, especially if you're working with young people. Certifications tend to be really important for people who want to do professional development. Also just doing like public recognition, acknowledging people that, hey, this person has been doing a lot of work in our community. Like it's as simple as like featuring them on your Instagram and saying, hey, thank you so much. Like that goes, thanking someone goes such a long way. And of course, like skill building and networking as well are really important. And then just around the accessibility portion, like I know a lot of us are fluent in English, but some of the communities we work may not be. So seeing if you can provide programming or services in Dari or Pashto, and like also just using simple language that people can understand as well, and covering any of the financial costs around like transportation or food or anything like that. Like I know some of the programs I went to in this virtual context, at least they gave me like a $25 like Uber gifts voucher. And so I had like dinner to eat that night. And of course, like making sure that our events are like also physically accessible, like that, for example, in that there's closed captions, or if we're providing translation, or there's opportunity for people with different abilities to still engage within the program as well. And that means also like being very explicit that you're willing to accommodate. And that means like if you're sharing an event, writing like, hey, if you have any accessibility accommodations, let me know. Or if you already know ahead of time, like saying that, hey, this event is going to be closed captions, or this venue is going to be wheelchair accessible. Because when you don't write that, I think a lot of folks, based on their experiences, and rightfully so, will assume it's not. So those are some of the barriers. I know I went through that really quickly just because I think we're a little short on time, but it was really great to see you folks and meet some of you as well. And I'm really excited about the projects that you're running, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I want to be a part of them as well. So please reach out to me. I'm on Twitter, Instagram under Yazmin Rajabi, and my email is also my full name, so reach out to me. And if you need any help, if you want me to like bounce around any ideas with you, or like troubleshoot, or want to text me about something, like let me know, and I'm happy to do that. Like I love the amount of work and dedication that, and like all this programming that's happening. I feel like this is like Afghan youth renaissance. That sounds really cheesy, but I think it's true. Like I think I've never seen the community ever be this active and this invested in supporting each other as well. And I really love that. And I want to make sure that I'm also part of it. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you for participating, and as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm so sorry, Yasna.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yasmin, that was so helpful. As someone who's been in the community organizing space for a really long time as well, that was so helpful even to me. So I'm sure all our participants found that really helpful. So thank you for spending your time and sharing and offering your continued support to our ACII participants. Sorry, Yasna, I'll let you take it away.
No. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Yasmin. It was such a valuable workshop. I learned so much, and I think everyone else did as well. You brought some very important topics and kind of issues and kind of obstacles to light, and I think this workshop will definitely help everyone with their projects that are to come. So it'll be great.
Happy to. And yes, and feel free to like distribute like my contact information and the slides to like, everyone here.
Beautiful, absolutely. Yes, they will be receiving the slides and recording as well as your contact information after